I need to say something before I start. And I need you to understand that I'm not saying it for effect. I am not telling you this because it's over. I am telling you this because I don't know what happens next, and I need this to exist somewhere other than my laptop and my head. If that sounds dramatic, I understand. 6 months ago, I would have clicked off a video that started like this. But I'm not being dramatic. I'm being practical. If something happens to me and this only exists on a hard drive in my apartment, it may as well not exist at all. So now, it exists here, too. My name doesn't matter, but what I do matters for context. For the past 4 years, I've run a small independent channel. Not this one, where I investigate government infrastructure failures. That sounds more impressive than it is. What it actually means is I spend 60 to 70 hours a week filing public records requests, reading inspection logs, cross-referencing permit databases, and documenting cases where a bridge, or a water system, or a public building failed because somebody in a regulatory body didn't do their job, or did their job wrong, or did their job on paper and never showed up. I'm not a journalist. I don't have credentials. I have a political science degree from a mid-tier state school, and a very specific fixation on accountability that probably says more about my personality than I'd like to admit. My channel has had about 40,000 subscribers, enough to pay my rent some months. Not enough for anyone to return my emails. I want to be clear about what kind of person I am, because it matters for what I'm about to tell you. I am not brave. I am not an investigator in any real sense. I am a guy with a Pacer account and too much free time who learned how to file FOIA requests by watching other people do it on YouTube, and then doing it badly for about 2 years before I got competent. The reason I'm good at this, if I'm good at this, is not intelligence. It's that I don't stop. I filed a request. I get a partial response. I file again. I appeal. I wait. I file a new request based on what the partial response implied. I do this for months. I have done this for over a year on a single topic. Most people don't do this because it's not rewarding. The dopamine hit, if it comes at all, comes 6 months after you started, and by then you've forgotten why you cared. That's the context. That's who I am. A person who doesn't stop pulling a thread, even when the thread stopped being interesting 2 months ago. In September of last year, 2024, I started a new project. The idea was simple. I wanted to look at bridge inspection failures across a specific multi-state region, Kentucky, West Virginia, and southeastern Ohio, because I'd noticed something odd in the Federal Highway Administration's National Bridge Inventory data. The NBI is a public database. Anyone can access it. It logs every bridge in the country and its inspection status, including when it was last inspected, its sufficiency rating, and whether it's been flagged for any structural concern. What I noticed was a cluster. In a roughly 160-mile corridor running from southeastern Ohio through parts of West Virginia and into eastern Kentucky, there were about 24 bridges that had been listed as inspected on schedule, every 24 months as required, but whose inspection reports were either missing, incomplete, or consisted of a single-page summary with no engineering detail. This isn't unusual for 1 or 2 bridges. Inspectors get behind. Reports get misfiled. Bureaucracy is messy. But 24, all within the same geographic corridor, all maintained by different county or municipal authorities, but all under the oversight of the same regional FHWA division office. That was a pattern. I want to be careful here because I know how this sounds. I know that I found a pattern is the sentence that every conspiracy person says right before they start connecting things that shouldn't be connected. I am aware of that. I've made fun of those people. So I want to tell you exactly what the pattern was and let you decide. The 23 bridges. I eventually narrowed it to 23, shared 3 characteristics. 1. Their inspection reports, when they existed at all, were filed by one of only 4 inspectors, all of whom were employed by the same private engineering firm contracted by the regional FHWA office. 2. All 23 bridges had sufficiency ratings between 51 and 65, which is the exact range where a bridge is structurally concerning but does not yet trigger mandatory federal intervention or funding reallocation. 50 is the threshold. Below 50, things start happening automatically. Reports get flagged, money moves, people pay attention. Every single one of these bridges sat just above that line. 11 of the 23 bridges were located on or adjacent to roads that served as the only access route to specific parcels of land, mostly rural, mostly unincorporated, that had been acquired by the same entity between 2014 and 2019. That third point is what got me. The first 2 points were interesting. The third point was a project. The entity was a holding company registered in Delaware. That means functionally nothing. Half the companies in the country are registered in Delaware. The name was Alward Property Group, LLC. It had no website. It had no website property-facing presence of any kind. Its registered agent was a law firm in Wilmington that represented about 400 other LLCs. Its Kentucky and West Virginia filings listed a P.O. box in Charleston as its principal address. When I searched for Alward in local property records, I found that it had acquired, through a combination of direct purchases and tax lien auctions, just under 9,000 acres across 12 counties in 3 states. 9,000 acres is a lot, but in that part of the country, land is cheap and large acquisitions aren't unusual. Timber companies, mining interests, hunting clubs, conservation groups, they all buy big parcels in Appalachia, so the acreage alone didn't mean anything. What meant something was the bridge connection. Why would a property holding company's acquisitions correlate so precisely with bridges that were being inspected on paper but not in practice? I want to pause here and tell you what I was thinking at this point, because I was not thinking anything sinister. I was thinking, here's a company that bought a bunch of cheap rural land, and the bridges that serve that land are deteriorating, and nobody's catching it because the inspections are being rubber-stamped by a contracted firm that's probably cutting corners to save money. That's not dark, that's Tuesday. That is the kind of government failure I document every month. Underfunded oversight, privatized inspection, predictable neglect. I figured I'd map it, document it, file some targeted FOIA requests to get the actual inspection records, or prove they didn't exist, and publish a video about how a regional FHWA office was failing its basic mandate. That was the plan in September. By November, the plan had changed because I started getting the FOIA responses back, and they were wrong. Not incomplete, not redacted. Wrong. Here's what I mean. When you file a FOIA request for bridge inspection records, you typically get back a packet, the inspection form, any engineering assessments, photographs, correspondence. For the first few bridges I requested, I got back clean packets, full reports, detailed photographs, recent dates, sufficiency ratings in the high 60s and low 70s. These were not the same numbers that appeared in the NBI database. The NBI had these bridges rated between 51 and 65. The inspection reports I received rated them significantly higher. If the reports were accurate, these bridges were in acceptable condition. Not great, but not concerning. Certainly not part of a pattern. My first thought was that the NBI data was outdated and the inspections I'd received were more recent. So I checked the dates. The inspections in my FOIA packets were dated within the same reporting period as the NBI entries. Same bridges, same time window, different numbers. That shouldn't happen. The NBI data comes from the inspection reports. It's not independently generated. State DOTs submitted based on the reports their inspectors file. If the report says 68, the NBI should say 68. For the NBI to say 54 while the report says 68 means one of 2 things. Either someone submitted different numbers to the NBI than what the report contained, or someone altered the report after submission and I received the altered version. I want to tell you what it feels like to sit in your apartment with 2 documents that can't both be true. It doesn't feel exciting. It feels like you made a mistake. My first instinct was that I had requested the wrong bridges. I went back and triple-checked the NBI structure numbers against my FOIA request. They matched. Then I thought maybe I was reading the sufficiency rating wrong, confusing it with another field. I wasn't. Then I thought maybe the NBI had a data entry error. Maybe some clerk transposed digits. That could explain 1 bridge. It couldn't explain 7. I had responses back for 7 bridges at that point, and all 7 showed the same discrepancy. NBI rating, low. Report rating, fine. I'm going to jump forward slightly because the next 2 months involved a lot of procedural work that isn't interesting to describe. I filed additional requests. I filed appeals when responses were delayed. I started requesting not just the reports themselves, but the submission logs. The records of when reports were transmitted from the state DOTs to the FHWA regional office. I requested email correspondence related to the contracted inspection firm. I requested personnel records for the 4 inspectors whose names appeared on the original reports. Most of this came back slowly, partially or not at all. But 3 things came back that mattered. First, the submission logs showed that for the 23 bridges in question, the sufficiency ratings submitted to the NBI were different from the ratings in the underlying reports. Someone had manually adjusted the numbers downward before submission, not by a lot. Not enough to push anything below 50 and trigger automatic federal action. Just enough to make the bridges look like they were in a specific band of concern that, paradoxically, attracted the least attention. Below 50, people look. Above 70, people don't look because there's nothing to see. Between 51 and 65, people don't look because the bridges are bad, but not bad enough to require action. It's the dead zone of bureaucratic attention. Second, 2 of the 4 inspectors whose names appeared on the reports had not been employed by the contracted firm for over a year before the reports were dated. 1 had retired. 1 had moved to a different state. Their names were on reports they could not have written. Third, and this is the one that changed things, the email correspondence I received, heavily redacted but not entirely, included a thread between the regional FHWA division chief and someone at the contracted inspection firm. The thread was from 2021. The subject line was partially redacted, but the visible portion read AEL word access coordination. The body of the emails was almost entirely blacked out, but one line near the bottom of the thread was visible. It read, "Understood. We'll keep the ratings in the window. Let us know if the timeline changes." In the window. I read that sentence probably 40 times. We'll keep the ratings in the window. That is not language that describes a bridge inspection. That is language that describes a managed outcome. Someone at a private engineering firm was coordinating with a federal division chief to keep specific bridge ratings within a specific range, and that coordination was explicitly connected to Alward Property Group. Now I was in a different kind of project. I need to explain what I did next, and I need to explain why. Because looking back, I think this is the point where I made the decision that I can't unmake. I decided to go look at the land. Not the bridges, the land. The 9,000 acres that Alward Property Group had acquired across 12 counties. I wanted to see what was on it. I had satellite imagery, of course, Google Earth, USGS data. But satellite images of rural Appalachia show you trees. That's it. Hollers and ridges and trees. If there was something on those properties that explained why a federal office was manipulating bridge ratings to keep them in a bureaucratic dead zone, I wasn't going to see it from a satellite. I should have known better. I should have known that the moment you go from filing records requests to physically showing up, you've changed what you are. Behind a laptop, you're a nuisance. On someone's property, you're a trespasser. In a records office, you're a citizen exercising a legal right. On a back road in rural West Virginia, you're a stranger with out-of-state plates. But I didn't think about it that way. I was thinking about content. I was thinking about the video. I was thinking that footage of the actual land would make the story concrete. Give it visuals, make people care. I was thinking like a creator, not like a person. I drove down in early December. I took 3 days off. I do freelance data entry work on the side, which is what actually pays my rent. And I drove from Columbus to Charleston, West Virginia, where I'd booked a motel. My plan was to use 2 days to visit as many of the Alward properties as I could access by public road, photograph what I could see from the road, and get general footage of the area. I wasn't going to trespass. I want to be clear about that. I was not going to set foot on private property. I was going to drive public roads, stop at public pull-offs, and use my camera from legal vantage points. The first day was uneventful and honestly kind of boring. I drove to 4 of the properties. 2 were accessible by county roads that ran past or through them. The other 2 were behind locked gates on what appeared to be old timber or mining access roads. From the road, the properties looked like exactly what you'd expect. Wooded hillsides, some old growth, some secondary, a few clearings, a couple of old structures, a barn foundation, what might have been a homestead chimney, rural Appalachian land that had been logged or mined decades ago and left to recover. I took footage. I took GPS readings. I made notes. I ate a gas station sandwich in my car and drove back to the motel feeling vaguely disappointed, which is how most investigative work actually feels. The second day is when things shifted. I was driving to a property in Broome County. The parcel was about 600 acres, acquired by Alward in 2017 to a tax lien auction. To reach it, I had to take a county road off Route 3 that wound up into a hollow, narrow, potholed, no center line, the kind of road where you pull over if someone's coming the other direction and hope you both fit. The road ran alongside a creek for about 2 miles, crossed a one-lane bridge, not one of the 23, just a regular small county bridge, and then continued for another mile before dead-ending at a locked gate with a no trespassing sign. I parked about 50 yards before the gate, on a wide spot in the road that might have been an old turnaround. I got out. I took photos of the gate, the sign, the tree line behind it. I stood there for a few minutes, just looking. The hollow was quiet. It was overcast, maybe 40 degrees. I could hear the creek and nothing else. I got back in my car to review the photos on my camera's LCD screen. And when I looked up through the windshield, there was a truck parked behind me. I don't know how to describe the feeling except to say that it was the feeling of having made a mistake. You can't identify yet. The truck was a white Chevy Silverado, maybe 5 or 6 years old. No front plate. West Virginia doesn't require front plates. And it was parked about 15 feet behind my car, angled slightly so that it was blocking the road. Not completely blocking it, I could have maneuvered around it. But it was positioned in a way that communicated intention. There was one person in the truck. Driver's seat. Male. I could see that much. He wasn't getting out. He was just sitting there. I want to tell you what I did, because it's important, and it's embarrassing. I sat in my car for about 4 minutes doing nothing. I was not formulating a plan. I was not assessing the threat. I was frozen in that specific way where your brain is running through social scripts and none of them apply. Do I wave? Do I get out and introduce myself? Do I just leave? Is this the property owner? Is this a neighbor? Is this someone who has nothing to do with anything and just happens to live up this road and is wondering why a stranger is parked near their gate? I decided to leave. I started my car, pulled forward to the turnaround, swung around, and drove back toward the truck. As I approached, I slowed down, because the road was narrow and I needed to pass him. I expected him to move, or to roll down his window, or to do something. He didn't. He sat perfectly still. I squeezed past his truck with maybe 8 inches of clearance, and as I passed, I looked over at him. He was looking at me, not angrily, not threateningly, just steadily. He was maybe 50. Weathered face, ball cap, work jacket. He looked like every third person in rural West Virginia, and he was holding a phone to his ear. I drove back down the hollow, turned onto Route 3, and went to the next property on my list. I told myself it was nothing. A landowner checking on his gate, a curious local. It was nothing. The next property was about 20 miles east in Raleigh County. Another Alward parcel, this one about 400 acres, acquired in 2015. The access road was marginally better, paved 2 lanes but deteriorating at the edges. It ran through a small, unincorporated community, maybe 15 houses spread over a mile, before climbing into the hills. The Alward property began where the houses ended, marked by a fence line and another posted sign. I pulled over near the fence line, on the gravel shoulder, and got out with my camera. I was being quicker this time. I didn't want to linger. I took a few wide shots of the tree line, a close-up of the posted sign, and a GPS reading. I was there for maybe 5 minutes. When I turned around to walk back to my car, there was a woman standing on the porch of the nearest house, maybe 200 feet away, watching me. This isn't unusual. In rural areas, strangers attract attention. I raised my hand in a wave. She didn't wave back. She went inside. I got in my car and left, but as I was pulling away, I checked my mirror and saw a vehicle pulling out from between 2 of the houses behind me. A white Chevy Silverado. I want to be careful here. I did not get the plate. I did not confirm it was the same truck. White Silverados are one of the most common vehicles in rural Appalachia. The odds of seeing 2 in one day are not just likely, they're almost guaranteed. I know this. I knew it then. But I also knew that the property I'd just left was 20 miles from the property where I'd seen the first truck. And I'd been at the second property for less than 10 minutes, and the truck pulled out not from a driveway, but from a gap between 2 houses, as if it had been parked there waiting. I drove back to Charleston without stopping. I checked my mirrors the whole way. I didn't see the truck again. At the motel, I sat on the bed and tried to think clearly. I had 2 options. 1. I was being followed, which meant someone knew who I was and what I was doing, which meant my FOIA requests had been flagged and my physical presence had been anticipated. 2. I was being paranoid, which meant I was a guy in a motel room constructing a surveillance narrative out of a common truck and a woman on a porch. I wanted very badly for it to be option 2. I'm not built for option 1. I'm built for spreadsheets and records requests and sitting in my apartment highlighting PDFs. I'm built for the boring version of this work, the version where nobody cares what you're doing because what you're doing doesn't matter enough for anyone to care. I spent the third day, my last day, in Charleston not driving to properties. Instead, I went to the Kanawha County Clerk's office and pulled property records for as many of the Alward parcels as I could access in person. I wanted deed histories. I wanted to see who had owned the land before Alward. I wanted to see what the properties had been used for. The clerk's office was quiet. A Wednesday morning in December. 2 other people in the records room, both of whom appeared to be title searchers doing routine work. I spent about 4 hours pulling deeds, plat maps, and tax records. The clerk was helpful in the way that county clerks in quiet offices often are. Not overly friendly, but competent, and unbothered by someone who clearly knew how to navigate a records index. Here's what I found, and I need to walk through it carefully because the details matter. Of the Alward properties I was able to trace, I got through 9 of them that day. 7 had the same prior ownership pattern. They had been held by individual families, often for decades, sometimes since the early 1900s. The families had let the tax payments lapse. The county had seized the properties, and Alward had acquired them at tax lien auctions. This is completely normal. This is how thousands of acres change hands in Appalachia every year. But 2 of the 9 had a different history. These 2 parcels, one in Boone County, one in McDowell County, had not been acquired through tax sales. They had been purchased directly from the previous owners. The Boone County parcel, the same one where I'd encountered the truck, had been sold to Alward by a man named Harold Fenton in 2017. The McDowell County parcel had been sold to Alward by a woman named Clara Driscoll in 2016. Neither of these names meant anything to me, but I wrote them down. And that night, back at the motel, I searched for them. Harold Fenton was dead. He had died in March 2018, about a year after selling the Boone County property to Alward. His obituary in the Beckley Register Herald was brief. It said he was 71, a veteran, and had been a lifelong resident of Boone County. It listed no cause of death. It listed no survivors. Clara Driscoll was also dead. She had died in January 2019, about 3 years after her sale to Alward. Her obituary was in the Welch Daily News. It said she was 68, had worked as a school cafeteria employee for 30 years, and had died at home. It listed a daughter in Virginia and 2 grandchildren. 2 people sell remote rural land to the same shell company, and both die within a few years. I know how that sounds. I also know that the sellers of rural Appalachian land are almost always elderly, because they're the ones who inherited it from the generation that actually used it. And elderly people die. The base rate of death among 70-year-olds in rural West Virginia is high. The correlation could be meaningless. But I wasn't looking at the deaths. I was looking at the sales. Both properties had been sold for amounts that were dramatically below assessed value. The Boone County parcel, 600 acres of timberland, sold for $41,000. Its county tax assessment at the time of sale was over $300,000. The McDowell County parcel, 412 acres, sold for $28,000. Its assessment was over $200,000. People sell land below value for all kinds of reasons, especially elderly people, especially in areas with no real market, especially if they need cash quickly. But the magnitude of the discount, 85 to 90% below assessed value, combined with the fact that both sellers died shortly after, combined with the fact that the buying entity was the same shell company whose properties were being protected by manipulated federal bridge inspections. That's not a pattern I was constructing. That's a pattern that was already there. I was just reading it. I drove back to Columbus the next morning. I had a lot of material. Enough for a video, probably. But I didn't start working on the video. Instead, I did something that I now understand was the turning point, though I didn't recognize it at the time. I reached out to the regional FHWA division office. Not through FOIA. Directly. I sent an email to the division chief, the same person whose name was on the email thread about keeping the ratings in the window. And I identified myself. I used my real name. I referenced my channel. I said I was working on a story about bridge inspection inconsistencies in the region, and I wanted to offer the office an opportunity to comment before I published. This is standard practice. You give the subject of your reporting a chance to respond. It's ethical. It's expected. I want you to understand what I did. I took myself out of the stack of anonymous FOIA requesters. A stack that, in a busy regional office, might include dozens of people at any time, most of whom are academics, journalists, lawyers, or curious citizens. And I put my name and face on it. I said, I'm the one asking. Here's who I am. Here's what I've found. What do you have to say? I sent the email on December 12th. I received a response on December 16th. It was from a communications officer at the division, not from the division chief. It was 3 sentences long. It thanked me for my inquiry, stated that the division was committed to transparency and public safety, and said that specific questions about inspection records should be directed through the FOIA process. A form letter, a nothing response. I wasn't surprised, but something else happened on December 16th. I got home from my day job, the data entry work, at around 6:30 in the evening. I parked in my apartment complex's lot, walked to my building, and noticed that my mailbox, the cluster mailbox unit at the entrance to the building, was hanging open. Not my specific box, the entire unit. The front panel, which the mail carrier opens with a master key to load all the boxes at once, was standing open about 2 inches. The latch appeared to be broken. I mention this because at the time I thought nothing of it. The mailboxes in my complex were old. Stuff broke. I took my mail, a credit card offer, and a utility bill, and went upstairs and forgot about it. It was 4 days later, December 20th, that I noticed the first thing that didn't make sense. I keep my FOIA files in a filing cabinet in my bedroom closet. It's a 2-drawer cabinet, and the bottom drawer is where I keep active project files. I'm organized about this. Each project gets a hanging folder. Inside the hanging folder, documents are arranged chronologically, most recent in front. I know this system because I set it up and I've used it for 3 years. On December 20th, I went to the cabinet to pull the bridge inspection file. The hanging folder was there, the documents were there, but the most recent document, the email correspondence with the "in the window" line, which I had printed and placed in the front of the folder on December 4th, was not in the front. It was in the middle of the folder, behind documents from October. I stood there holding the folder and tried to explain it to myself. I must have put it back in the wrong order. I was tired when I filed it. I wasn't paying attention. These are the things you tell yourself. And they are reasonable things. People misfile documents. I've done it before. But I hadn't. I knew I hadn't because when I filed that document on December 4th, I had also placed a yellow sticky note on it that said Kiki use in opening. The sticky note was gone. I went through the entire folder, page by page. The sticky note was not in the folder. I checked the drawer. I checked the floor of the closet. I checked the other folders. It wasn't there. Now. A sticky note can fall off. Sticky notes fall off things all the time. That is literally the most common failure mode of a sticky note. So I am not telling you that a missing sticky note is evidence of a break-in. I am telling you that a missing sticky note, combined with a misfiled document, combined with a broken mailbox, combined with the timing, 4 days after I sent an email identifying myself to the people I was investigating, formed a shape in my mind that I couldn't unform. I searched my apartment. I didn't know what I was looking for. I checked the windows, all locked. I checked the door. No marks, no damage. I checked the closets, under the bed, behind the shower curtain, the way you do when you're not really afraid but you're performing the actions of a person who might be. Everything was normal. Nothing was out of place, except for a document that was in the wrong position in a folder and a sticky note that didn't exist anymore. I slept badly that night. Not because I was scared, because I was embarrassed. I was embarrassed by the possibility that I was turning into the kind of person I'd always dismissed. Someone who sees patterns in noise and assigns meaning to coincidence because they want their work to matter more than it does. I didn't publish the video. I didn't do anything for the rest of December. I went to my family's house for Christmas. I ate too much. I watched football. I came back to Columbus on December 28th and told myself I'd pick the project back up in January with fresh eyes. On January 3rd, I opened my laptop to start organizing the footage and files and found that my cloud storage, I use a standard service, nothing fancy, had a login from an IP address I didn't recognize dated December 19th, 1 day before I noticed the misfiled document. The login had accessed my files. It had not deleted anything. It had not modified anything. It had not downloaded anything as far as I could tell from the access logs. It had simply looked. This is the point where I want to tell you I called the police or hired a lawyer or called a journalist at a real outlet. I didn't. I changed my passwords. I enabled two-factor authentication, which I should have had already. I ran a malware scan, which found nothing. And I sat there for a long time thinking. Here's what I was thinking. If someone accessed my files, they now know everything I know. They've seen the FOIA responses. They've seen the discrepancies. They've seen the Alward property map. They've seen the email about keeping ratings in the window. They've seen my notes about Harold Fenton and Clara Driscoll. They know the shape of the story I'm building, and they didn't delete anything. That's the part that got to me. If you break into someone's files to stop a story, you destroy the evidence. You corrupt the data. You do something. You don't just look, unless looking is the point. Unless the point is not to stop the story, but to know exactly what the story contains, so you can prepare for it, or so you can make a decision about what to do about the person telling it. January was strange. Nothing happened. That's what made it strange. After December, the truck, the mailbox, the document, the login, January was silent. No unexplained access. No anomalies. No white Silverados. I went back to my routine. I worked on other, smaller projects. I published 2 videos about unrelated topics. A water main failure in Toledo and a school building inspection scandal in Indiana. Normal stuff, my stuff. But I also kept working on the bridge project, quietly. I didn't file any new FOIA requests. I didn't reach out to anyone. I just worked with what I had, organizing it, mapping it, building the narrative structure of the video I would eventually publish, and I started doing something I'd never done before. I started looking into Alward Property Group, not through public records, but through people. I don't mean I hired a private investigator or did anything sophisticated. I mean I started searching for the names I'd found, the registered agent, the law firm, the 4 inspectors, and I started looking for connections between them, LinkedIn profiles, professional directories, conference attendee lists, the boring, public, technically legal but feels invasive kind of searching that anyone with an internet connection can do. I'm going to tell you what I found, but I need to introduce another person first because this is where the story stops being just mine. In the second week of January, I got a message through my channel's contact form. This isn't unusual. I get messages regularly, tips, questions, occasional threats from local officials who didn't like being featured in a video. This message was from a woman who identified herself as a graduate student at a university in Virginia. I'll call her Dana. That's not her real name. Dana said she had been researching land acquisition patterns in central Appalachia for her thesis. She had found Alward Property Group independently. She had been looking at it from a different angle. Not bridge inspections, but land use and environmental compliance. She had found that several Alward properties were in areas that had been subject to environmental remediation orders related to old mining operations, orders that required ongoing monitoring and periodic inspections by the EPA or state environmental agencies. And she had found that those inspections, like my bridge inspections, appeared to be happening on paper, but not in practice. I want to tell you what it felt like to read that message. It felt like vertigo. Not the good kind, where you feel like you're on to something big. The bad kind, where the thing you thought was your discovery turns out to be a door that other people have also opened, and you don't know who else is behind it. I responded to Dana cautiously. I didn't share my findings. I asked her what specifically she had found, and how she had found me. She said she had searched for Alward online and found nothing. No news coverage, no public records analysis, no mention anywhere. But that she had found a FOIA request log on a government transparency site that showed multiple requests for my state related to bridge inspections in the same counties where her Alward properties were located. She had matched the request patterns to my channel's geographic focus. It was good research. It was the kind of work I do. We talked by email, then by phone, over the next 2 weeks. I'll compress what we shared with each other into the essentials. From Dana's side, Alward had acquired properties that were subject to environmental monitoring. The monitoring was being conducted by a contractor, a different firm from my bridge inspectors, but also a private company. The monitoring reports were being filed on schedule, but Dana had obtained actual soil and water samples from 2 of the properties through a contact at a state university's environmental science department, and the samples did not match the conditions described in the monitoring reports. The reports described remediated, stable sites. The samples described active contamination consistent with ongoing disturbance of sealed mine waste. For my side, I shared the bridge inspection discrepancies, the in-the-window email, the property acquisition pattern, and the deaths of Fenton and Driscoll. I did not tell her about the truck, the break-in evidence, or the cloud access. I don't know why I held that back. Maybe because saying it out loud to another person would have made it real in a way I wasn't ready for. Dana had a theory. She thought Alward was acquiring properties with legacy environmental liabilities, old mine sites, contaminated land at deep discounts, because the contamination made them undesirable and depressed their value. Then, through corrupted monitoring reports, the properties were being represented as clean or stable, which allowed them to be used or resold without the liability attaching. The bridge inspections, she thought, were a secondary layer of insulation. By keeping the bridges in the bureaucratic dead zone, the properties remained functionally inaccessible to casual oversight. No one dries up a hollow on a structurally questionable bridge to check on a piece of land that's already been reported as fine. It was a good theory. It was clean. It was the kind of thing that happens, not as a vast conspiracy, but as a mid-level corruption scheme involving a handful of people in overlapping positions of minor authority. A division chief here, a contract inspector there, a law firm that doesn't ask questions, a holding company that exists only on paper. Nobody in this theory needed to be powerful. They just needed to be in the right chairs and willing to not do their jobs. I wanted it to be true. I wanted it to be true because it was a story I could tell. Government corruption, environmental fraud, poisoned land. It was important, it was real, and it was the kind of thing my channel existed to expose. I could see the video. I could see the thumbnail. I could see the view count. But there was something that didn't fit, and Dana saw it before I did. "Why the bridge ratings?" she asked during one of our phone calls. "If the point is just to keep the properties off the radar, why not let the bridges fail naturally? They're already in bad shape. If a bridge gets a 45 rating, it gets flagged, sure, but flagged for road maintenance, not for environmental inspection. The bridge and the land behind it aren't administratively connected. A bad bridge rating doesn't trigger an EPA visit, so why bother manipulating them at all?" I didn't have an answer. She was right. The bridge manipulation was an enormous risk, involving federal employees, falsified reports, a paper trail, for a benefit that didn't logically follow. If you're hiding contaminated land, you don't need the road to be in any particular condition. You just need the monitoring reports to be clean. The bridges were a separate system entirely, unless the bridges weren't about keeping people out, unless they were about something else. This is the point where I want to be precise because what follows is what I know, not what I've concluded. I am going to tell you what I found, and I am going to tell you where I am now, and I am going to let you hold it, because I cannot hold it alone anymore. In the second week of February, Dana sent me a file. She had obtained it through her university contact, the environmental scientist who had provided the soil samples. The file was a set of GPS coordinates, 26 of them. Each one corresponded to a location on an Alward property where a soil or water monitoring station was supposed to be installed, a permanent marker essentially, where inspectors would go to take samples and verify that the environmental conditions matched the reports. Dana had cross-referenced the 26 coordinates with satellite imagery and found that at 23 of them, 23, the same number as my bridges, there was no visible monitoring station, no equipment, no cleared area, no access path, nothing. The stations existed in the reports but not on the ground. That wasn't the file she sent me. She had already told me that. The file she sent me was something else. Her university contact, in the process of pulling the GPS data, had also pulled a set of coordinates that were embedded in the same database but were not labeled as monitoring stations. They were labeled with a code she didn't recognize, a 6-character alphanumeric string that didn't correspond to any standard EPA or state environmental coding system. There were 14 of these coordinates. All 14 were on Alward properties, and when Dana mapped them, they were not at the surface. They were depth coordinates. Latitude, longitude, and depth, measured in feet below grade. 14 points, on 14 different Alward properties, at depths ranging from 60 to 340 feet underground. I sat with that file for a long time. I am not a geologist. I am not a mining engineer. I don't know what's at 60 to 340 feet below the surface of rural Appalachia. I know what used to be there. Coal, mostly, and the infrastructure to extract it. Shafts. Tunnels. Rooms. Miles and miles of them across the entire region, most of them sealed or collapsed or flooded decades ago. Dana and I talked about what the coordinates could mean. Old mine workings, mapped for some legitimate purpose. Monitoring wells drilled deep to track groundwater contamination. Geological survey points. There were reasonable explanations. There always are. But none of the reasonable explanations accounted for why the coordinates were embedded in a database connected to a shell company that was manipulating federal inspections and buying land from people who died shortly after selling it. I want to tell you about the last thing that happened before the thing that made me record this. On February 22nd, I drove to one of the 14 locations. It was in Lawrence County, Ohio, my state, close enough for a day trip. The Alward property there was about 300 acres, acquired in 2018 through a tax sale. The GPS coordinate pointed to a location about a quarter mile from the nearest road, on a wooded hillside. I did not go onto the property. I went to the road, which was a public county road, and I walked along the shoulder to the point closest to the GPS coordinate. From the road, I could see nothing unusual. Trees, underbrush, a hillside that looked like every other hillside in southeastern Ohio. But I had brought a topographic map, and I had brought the USGS historical mining data for Lawrence County, and when I compared them, I could see that the GPS point sat directly above a mapped entry to an abandoned coal mine, the Ridley No. 4 mine, closed in 1962, listed as sealed by the Ohio Department of Natural Resources. I stood on that road for maybe 10 minutes. I took photos. I took a GPS reading to confirm my location. I looked at the hillside and tried to see something that wasn't trees. Then I looked down at the road surface, and I noticed the tire tracks. The road was unpaved at that point, gravel and clay. It had rained 2 days earlier. The surface was soft, and there were fresh tire tracks, heavy vehicle tracks, probably a truck, that turned off the road and went through a gap in the tree line that I hadn't noticed before. Not a driveway, not a maintained access point, just a gap, maybe 8 feet wide, where something had been driving regularly enough to keep the vegetation from closing in. The tracks went into the Alward property, toward the hillside, toward the mine entry. I photographed the tracks. I photographed the gap. I got in my car and I left. That was February 22nd. On March 1st, a Saturday, I came home from getting groceries and found my apartment door unlocked. I need to say this clearly. I lock my door. I lock it every time I leave. It's not a conscious decision anymore. It's a reflex, the way you check your pockets for your keys. I locked it that morning. I know I locked it because I remember the specific physical motion of turning the deadbolt and hearing it click as I shifted the grocery list to my other hand. The door was unlocked. Not open. Not damaged. Just unlocked the way it would be if someone had a key. I did not go inside. I stood in the hallway for probably 2 minutes, holding my grocery bags, staring at my door handle. Then I went back outside to my car, put the groceries in the trunk, and called my landlord. I told him I thought my lock was malfunctioning. He came by an hour later and checked it. It was fine. He opened and closed it several times, locked and unlocked it. "Works fine," he said. He looked at me like I was wasting his time. I went inside after he left. I searched the apartment the way I had in December, methodically, performing the gestures of security. Everything was where it should be. My laptop was on my desk. My filing cabinet was closed. Nothing was moved. Nothing was taken. Nothing was out of place. Nothing except one thing, and I need to describe it exactly. On my desk, next to my laptop, I keep a small stack of blank index cards. I use them as bookmarks, to-do reminders, temporary labels. They're plain white 3x5 cards from a pack I bought at Staples. The pack was in my desk drawer. The stack on the desk was 6 or 7 cards, squared up, next to my coffee mug. When I sat down at my desk, the top card on the stack had writing on it, not my writing. Small, neat, printed letters in black ink. It said, "The window is closing." I want to tell you that I did something decisive after that I called the FBI or drove to a newspaper or uploaded everything I had to the internet immediately. I want to tell you that, but it's not what happened. What happened is I sat at my desk for a very long time and read those 4 words over and over and felt something I had never felt before in my life. Not fear, exactly. Something more specific, the feeling of being known. Not known in the way a friend knows you or a family member knows you. Known in the way that a system knows you, as a data point, as a variable, as a factor that has been assessed and assigned a value and weighed against a cost. The window is closing. The same word from the email. We'll keep the ratings in the window. They were telling me they knew what I had. They were telling me in language that proves they were the same people. And they were telling me that the period in which I could still choose what to do was not infinite. I don't know what they want me to do. That's the thing I keep turning over. The note didn't say stop or back off or delete everything. It said the window is closing. It's a time statement, not a directive. It tells me that a condition is changing, not what I should do about it, and I don't know if that's deliberate. If the ambiguity is the point, if making me guess is the weapon, or if it's simply a statement of fact from someone who knows something I don't about what happens next. Here is what I know, as of right now. Alward Property Group has acquired approximately 9,000 acres of land across 3 states. Much of that land sits above abandoned mine workings. Federal bridge inspections and environmental monitoring reports covering that land have been manipulated by private contractors coordinating with government officials. At least 2 people who sold land to Alward died within a few years of the sale, after accepting prices far below market value. There are 14 GPS coordinates pointing to underground locations on Alward properties that do not correspond to any known monitoring or survey program. Fresh vehicle tracks indicate active, regular access to at least one of these underground locations, through an abandoned mine entry that is officially listed as sealed. Someone has accessed my home and my digital files, and they have left a message indicating awareness of the specific evidence I hold. I don't know what's in the mines. I want to be honest about that. I don't know. And I haven't gone in. And I'm not going to go in. I know what the shape of the evidence implies, and I know that there are things that require remote, inaccessible land, and sealed underground space, and corrupt inspectors, and a shell company, and silence, and the kind of money it takes to buy all of those things. But I'm not going to say it, because saying it commits me to a conclusion I can't prove, and because the moment I name it, this becomes a specific kind of story that can be dismissed as speculation. So instead I'll tell you what happened 3 days ago, which is why I'm recording this now. On Tuesday, Dana called me. She calls from a blocked number, which she started doing in February after she noticed a car she didn't recognize parked near her apartment building on 3 different days. She was upset, not panicked. Dana doesn't panic. She's more structured than I am, more disciplined. But I could hear something in her voice I hadn't heard before. She told me that she had come home from campus and found a manila envelope in her mailbox. No postage, no return address, hand-delivered. Inside the envelope was a single printed page. It was a satellite image, high resolution, much higher than commercial satellite, of the Lawrence County property I had visited on February 22nd. The image was dated February 22nd. In the image, you could see the road. You could see the gap in the tree line. You could see the tire tracks. You could see my car. And next to my car, standing on the road, looking down at the tire tracks, you could see me. The image had no text, no markings, no message. Just the image. Just me, photographed from above, standing in the place where I shouldn't have been, doing the thing that proved I knew. Dana asked me what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know. She said she thought we needed to go public with everything, now, before the window, whatever it was, closed. I said I wasn't sure that going public would protect us or paint a target on us. She said we were already targets. I said maybe. We were both quiet for a while. Then she said something that I haven't been able to stop thinking about. She said, "You know they let you find the email." The "in the window" line. Everything else was redacted. Why was that one line visible? You thought it was a mistake. It wasn't a mistake. They wanted you to know the shape of it. They wanted you to see just enough to keep pulling. Because as long as you were pulling, you were mapping yourself for them. Every FOIA request told them what you knew. Every property you visited told them what you'd found. You were never investigating them. They were reading you. I want to tell you she's wrong. I want to tell you that the FOIA process is anonymized, that requests are processed by clerks who don't know or care who's asking. But that's not true. FOIA requests include your name, your address, your email. They are public records themselves, in many jurisdictions. Every request I filed was a letter that said, "Here is my name, here is where I live, and here is exactly what I know and what I don't know yet." I was mapping my own investigation for them. Every step I took was a data point in their model of how much I knew. And when I sent that email to the division chief in December, When I voluntarily identified myself and summarized my findings, I didn't just give them my name. I gave them the shape of the entire story. And now I'm telling you, and I don't know if this is the act that saves me, or the act that finishes it. I don't know if publicity is a shield or a signal. I don't know if the window that's closing is my window to act, or their window to decide I'm not worth the trouble. I don't know if tomorrow my door will be locked when I come home, or if it won't. What I know is this: there are places in this country where the land is cheap, and the oversight is thin, and the distance between what's recorded and what's real is wide enough to hide almost anything. And there are structures. Not conspiracies, not shadow governments, just structures. Ordinary structures made of contracts and shell companies and people who don't ask questions that exist inside that gap. And the gap is maintained, actively, by people who understand that the most effective form of concealment is not secrecy but paperwork, not silence but compliance, not hiding but filing the correct forms with the incorrect numbers and trusting that no one will ever care enough to check. I cared enough to check. I don't know yet what that's going to cost me. The window is closing. I can feel it, not as a metaphor, as a fact. Something is contracting around this, and I'm inside it, and I'm talking to you because being inside it alone is worse than being inside it with witnesses. If you're hearing this, and I don't know when you're hearing this, or what's happened between now and then, I need you to know that everything I've described is documented. The FOIA responses, the email, the GPS coordinates, the photographs, the satellite image, the index card, the login records, all of it. It's in 3 places: my hard drive, my cloud storage, and a flash drive that I mailed to someone I trust, whose name I will not say here. I am not asking you to do anything. I am not asking you to investigate. I am asking you to remember that I said this, on this date, and that I was specific, and that I was scared, but I was not making it up, and that the thing I found was not a theory. It was a window, and someone wanted it closed. That's all I have. I'm sorry it isn't more. I'm sorry I don't have the ending that tells you what it means or what was in the ground or who these people are. I don't have it. I'm the guy with the spreadsheets and the FOIA requests, and I've reached the edge of what those tools can show me, and beyond that edge is something I am not equipped to see. I'll be here, in my apartment, with my locked door that doesn't stay locked, waiting to find out what the window looks like when it closes. I need to add something. I wasn't going to, but I need to. After I finished recording the first part of this, what you just heard, I saved the file and got up to get water. It was around 11 at night. My apartment has a window in the kitchen that faces the parking lot. I've looked out that window 10,000 times. I looked out of it tonight, and I saw a truck in the lot that doesn't belong to anyone in my building. It was white. I turned off the kitchen light. I stood in the dark and watched it. It was parked in a visitor spot, facing my building. I couldn't tell if anyone was inside. The lot has those orange sodium lights that make everything look flat and amber, and the truck's windows were tinted. Or maybe it was just the angle. I stood there for maybe 5 minutes. The truck didn't move. Then the headlights came on. Just the headlights. The engine didn't start. The lights came on, stayed on for about 10 seconds, and went off. That's a signal. I don't know what it signals, but it's not a malfunction, and it's not a coincidence. Someone sitting in a truck in my parking lot at 11 at night turned on the headlights while I was standing in my kitchen window. They were either telling me they were there or telling me they knew I was watching. I stepped back from the window. I went to my bedroom. I pulled the filing cabinet away from the closet wall, something I'd never done before, and I looked behind it. I don't know what I expected to find. I found dust and a pen cap and a piece of paper. The piece of paper was a printout. It was a map. My map. The one I'd been building on my laptop. The one showing all 23 bridges, all the Alward properties, the 14 underground coordinates. My map, printed on paper, placed behind my filing cabinet. I did not print that map. I have never printed that map. It existed only as a digital file on my laptop and in my cloud storage. Someone printed it in my apartment, on my printer, and put it behind my filing cabinet. Not on my desk, where I'd see it immediately. Behind the cabinet, where I'd find it only if I moved the cabinet, which I'd only do if I was scared enough to search. They knew I'd get scared. They knew one. They put the map where the scared version of me would look. I am telling you this from my bedroom, with the door locked, which means nothing, because the front door lock means nothing. I am telling you this because the map on the paper had one difference from the map on my screen. One of the 14 underground coordinates, the Lawrence County one, the mine I visited, had a circle drawn around it in red ink, hand-drawn. Not printed. Someone held a pen and drew a circle on a map they printed on my printer in my apartment. Inside the circle, in the same small, neat handwriting as the index card, were 2 words: "You're close." I don't know if that's a warning or an invitation. I don't know if close means close to the truth or close to something else. I don't know if I should run or publish or call someone or do nothing. The truck is still in the lot. I checked again. It hasn't moved. The window is closing. I don't think it's a metaphor anymore. I think it might be tonight. I'm going to upload this now. Whatever happens after that happens to someone who already spoke. That has to count for something. I have to believe that has to count for something.